And we're live. Welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us into our third season of the Blasters and Blades podcast. Hey, all you crazy sci fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So, without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Michael Morton, introduce himself. So, can you tell our listeners and viewers who you are?
Hey everyone, I am Mike Morton, retired United States Air Force, and now working for the Space Force as a civilian and brand new author. Just had my first book published, so I'm looking to publish a lot more as I go forward here.
Okay, and the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we first found him. And he found me because he was in one of my anthologies, and then we just sort of stayed in touch when he started writing. And as you know, if you listen to this podcast for even one half a second, we try to support other veterans in the writing space. So he sort of fit the bill. I mean, he's Air Force; it's almost military, right?
Almost, yes.
Almost. I got friends that listen that are Zoomies, and they're gonna like give me rations of grief. But what are you gonna do? So so that's how we first found him. And obviously now that he's got his novel out, we had to have him back. So thank you for coming back, by the way. I mean, you worked with me professionally, and you didn't run screaming, so that's something.
No, yeah, I had a great time writing for that anthology on Deadly
Um,
Ground.
yeah, Veronica Jaguar did an excellent job with that audiobook.
Yeah,
Now we
I
just
had.
got to figure out how to make people more passionate about short content so they start selling.
Yeah, that is surprising because I would have thought a lot more people would have checked that out just for the idea of, how do you write about people who are engaged in a fight, probably their last fight, something that's going to end them. And to me, that just sounds incredibly interesting. And it's the kind of stories that make up some of the battles of history.
Yeah, it's that was sort of the inspiration. So we basically took the idea of a heroic last stand and put it in sci-fi space, basically, and went to town. And I mean, like I had letters from the so we use Red Adept editing, and so you get different editors sometimes for the various short stories because you pay for it like a novel because they do it just by word count, but because there's a bunch of short stories to get it out quicker, they split it up. And we had a couple of the different editors that were like, their story made me cry, and I'm like, good, that's what it's supposed to do. And
Yeah.
so I surprised that one. I was really proud of that one. And that cover Jamie Glover did, oh my god, that's awesome.
Yeah, that totally took me back to my early days of reading sci-fi. That was a real good throwback cover.
Yeah, I actually told him I was like, I want Battlestar Galactica meets Star Wars meets Star Trek, and just as a joke. And he's like, okay. And then he gave me that cover, and I'm like, I was joking, but I like the cover. Um, so it's one of those ones. Jamie Glover does amazing covers. He doesn't get nearly enough credit for what he does. But all right, we've rambled long enough. So before we decide whether we continue, you have to answer the religion questions: Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly.
Oh, that's a tough choice between Star Wars and Firefly. Uh, I've watched Star Wars since the beginning. I remember seeing a New Hope in the theaters, but Firefly, that's something that just grabs you right away. I probably have to go with nostalgia and say Star Wars.
Okay, that's a good answer. Star Wars was great. They made those three most excellent movies. I really wish they'd revisit the property and just give me more content than those first three movies, but some
Yeah.
things just weren't meant to be. All right, and because we're polytheistic, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, that again, nostalgia, and that's simply because of Schwarzenegger's Conan. I'd have to go with that. I probably watched that movie a dozen times when I first saw it on cable TV, and it's just an amazing, amazing story to tell.
We used to add instead of Conan, we had Lord of the Rings, but that was just so unfair to put that story in the realm to be compared against anything else. So we had to take that one out because so that's some steep competition.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Um, and then the other thing was we wanted properties that were both like screen properties that were also books, so we can sort of pull in all avenues of the fan base. Listeners, if you're at this part and you've got suggestions for something other than Conan that you thought is as iconic as Game of Thrones and The Wheel of Time, we would love to hear it. put it in the comment section. We can start a debate. I mean, an argument. I mean, we can discuss it civilly, like gentlemen. But
Is that
we
what we
here at
are?
the sometimes I pretend. I mean, you were an officer, you kind of had to be, but like I was a grunt. I could get away with, my knuckles dragging and grunting instead of talking. It worked for us. So we here at the Blasters and Blades podcast like both the fantastical and the scientific. But what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Um, Probably sci-fi. The first sci-fi books that I remember reading were the Tom Swift novels, way back when. And if you're not familiar with Tom Swift, he is the genius teenager who can solve any scientific problem given enough inspiration. And then he worked with his dad and a bunch of other people. His dad was like the engineer preeminent and adventurer, and they just had a bunch of different sci-fi related adventures. Unfortunately, the science was usually pretty hand wavium. A lot of these were written back in the 40s and 50s, but it was super inspirational for a young kid to read those and say, "Hey, wow, this is pretty cool. This is a kid. This isn't an adult. This is a kid going out on these adventures and having fun, getting into danger, but not doing it by being stupid, but by trying to do the right thing."
Now, was it hand wavium at the time when it was written, or was that what we thought would happen? That's the other question, because you got
Yeah.
to compare science for what they knew at the time.
Some of it, yeah, some of it was guesswork on how things like atomic energy would turn out, and other things were just pure hand wavium. Where you had God, what was it? It was something about he had a telescope that could also function as a microscope, and I'm pretty sure optics don't work that way, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm. All I know is that he, he was a scientific mind. Heinlein actually was worked for NASA with NASA, designing some of the spacesuits.
Yeah,
So it wasn't like he didn't have some level of expertise in the field of space. So my guess would be, although I don't know, if you do know, if you're a Heinlein expert, we would love to have you on, and we'll make that an episode almost. But I wonder how much of that is just we've learned more since then, and it didn't age well, and how much of it was hand wavium at the time, and that I wouldn't know. So
yeah.
that
Heinlein did do. Oh gosh, it was one of his anthologies where he wrote like 20 or 30 different predictions about the future, and he wrote those like in like the 50s or 60s, and then he revisited them later on before his death to see how well they had aged. So it's actually a pretty good read to see kind of where the mind of a science fiction author goes when they're thinking or trying to think in the future and trying to guess at how things will evolve.
Yeah. So what was your first memory of engaging in speculative fiction? Was it, reading the Heinlein stories? Was it watching something on television? Like, where did you first discover it?
So I mean, where did I first actually get into it? Like,
Yeah, what was the first? We ask in general. The first one was more about book related, but then we widened the question because the idea is, for some people, if you're of the right age, maybe the first time you encountered spec fic was watching Star Trek on the television, or
yeah,
something else.
yeah. Um, I did a lot of reading when I was young. I actually was a big, huge World War II military history fan. Um, and that was before I was even a teenager. I was surprising a lot of my teachers by checking out books from the more advanced sections. They're like, "You can't read that." I'm like, "Yeah, sure I can." Um, and then moving on, I think Starship Troopers was kind of like my gateway into something else, something that could go beyond just fantastical adventures that were just adventures in and of themselves. Heinlein in Starship Troopers, he built a universe that, if he had, if he was alive today and there was the interest, right, he could take that universe in a whole bunch of different directions and explore, the Bug Society, the Skinny Society, or how the Society and the Federation came to be. So, um, go that was what I think inspired me to check out a whole bunch of other authors in both science fiction and fantasy, because once you start reading a lot of other Heinlein stuff, he does start branching out somewhere into fantasy. Glory Road, right? That's as much fantasy as it is science fiction. So that's something that I really enjoyed doing was every discovery, every new book that I started to read back in the 70s and 80s. It was opening my eyes to something new.
Okay. So, what is it you love about the genre? Is there any one specific thing? Is it just the ability to do all the things? If you had to narrow it down.
Oh gosh. I like writing about interesting characters. So I don't know that it's necessarily the genre. I mean, you can do as many things with fantasy as you can do with sci-fi, just in different ways. But writing about interesting characters where the magic or the fiction, the science is there to support the story that the character is going through, the conflicts that they're going through. To me, that's what's more interesting than having a Michael Bay type explosions everywhere movie or plot line.
Yeah, I think you can over rely on the technological background action instead of the characters.
Yeah.
But then those movies, I don't know, they don't resonate as well, and they don't often age as well either.
No, they don't. I mean, most of the time you don't remember who the main characters were. You just remember the really cool scenes. And having really cool scenes is good, right? You want to have something that's going to grab your reader or your viewer and draw them into what's going on. But to keep them engaged and to keep them coming back, you've got to have interesting characters.
Absolutely. So, how did your love of speculative fiction as a genre transition into you deciding to write stories in that field?
So that first happened in high school. When I was a senior, I had a lot of electives that I could choose from, and one of them was writing fiction. What do they call it? Oh gosh, it's like story development for the future or something like that. I don't remember. Really creative title in a California high school, but the teacher was really really good. Mrs. Elizabeth, I still remember her, and she encouraged us all to explore not just one field of writing, but any field that we wanted. I remember my final essay that I wrote for her was a post-apocalyptic story where a military unit is was hidden away in a bunker under Mount Rushmore, and they awaken. Yeah, it's like 500 years in the future after the apocalypse, and it was their job to start exploring and reestablishing the government. So that was my first really, I guess, semi-serious venture into trying to write something of my own rather than just reading about it.
Is that story still available if your Uber fans wanted to read it?
Oh, I wish I could find that notebook that I wrote that in. It may be in the basement of my parents' house somewhere packed away, but I doubt it. It was pretty bad. Something that an 18-year-old who grew up on military history would write in the late 80s. So probably best that it doesn't see the light of day.
Okay. So many authors will let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So, were there any specific formidable moments that you think shaped you as a storyteller?
Um, Not so much moments, but people. Like I said, Mrs. Elizabeth, who encouraged us to write anything that we wanted, and basically gave us permission to explore what we were thinking and what we wanted to do. Um, the folks. So my next step in writing spec fiction was on AOL. Actually, there was a bunch of us that were part of the Mercedes Lackey fandom, Arrows Online, and so we engaged in a lot of fan fiction writing, and that was a really good group of people who did a lot of encouragement, a lot of help, honest help, saying, "Hey, look, fix your grammar or fix your storytelling or whatever." But having people just having a lot of people from a bunch of different backgrounds encourage you in your writing and tell you, yeah, you know what, I like the story that you're telling, I like the characters that you're creating, do more of that. That's probably some of the best encouragement that you can get beyond any book or class that you can take, because it hits right to the heart, and it makes you, or at least it made me want to do more of it, and it really explore just how much more can I do? How much better can my characters be?
Okay. So I mentioned obviously in the beginning of this interview that you were a veteran as well. So we ask all of our military veterans this question: how do you think your time in the U.S. Air Force affects the way you tell stories?
So that's kind of funny. Talking with some other veterans, especially guys who, like me, have done a lot of staff work. When you're a military staff officer, you get used to a number of things in your writing. Number one, you get used to producing on time and quality work. You get used to taking criticism and not taking it personally. uh, you know, Almost every single boss that I had that critiqued my staff work, it was to make the product better. And if the product looked good, then I looked good. So I guess I'm fortunate in that respect. I've heard some horror stories about some other guys, but so when you write that way, you learn good grammar, you learn good punctuation, you learn how to write succinctly and be able to explain complex issues in as few words as possible. So I found that it's translated a lot into my writing. I tend to edit as I go. I don't write a draft and then go back and re-edit. I will, write for a little while and then I'll go back and reread what I read or what I've written because that's how I would do it at work. Um, and it just that's my flow. That's how I do things. It works for me. So usually when I'm done finishing a short story or when I was done with my novel, I didn't need a whole lot of time at the end to go back and edit it and make changes because it was already done as I went along.
Okay, that is definitely helpful. It's a different experience than someone who is at the lower level tier, I guess, in the process. The average airman, sailor, marine, soldier. Um, but I can see how that could help. So, do you ever draw from people you knew when you were in the military?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just not a complete caricature, but specific elements. One of the things that I also learned early on in leadership lessons is it doesn't matter if you're working for a good leader or a bad leader. There's always something you can learn, whether it's how to do things or how not to do things. And the same can be said of all of your coworkers, right? How to be a good coworker, how to be a bad coworker. So you learn to recognize the different traits in people that either you want to associate with them and you want them on a project with you, or people is just, what, I will talk to you via email because talking to you in person only raises my blood pressure.
As per my last email.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about how your time in uniform affects the way you tell the stories. How does it affect the way you engage with content as a reader?
So, well, as you know, most veterans, right? We look for accuracy in any sort of military science fiction story, or any sort of military story. But I tend now to look at how things are done. Um, I don't necessarily need an author to explain every aspect of his world to me, but when things don't make sense in the author's universe on how things work, or there's jarring inconsistencies, I've noticed that stands out a lot more to me because maybe I'm just expecting at least there to be a process. The process itself may not make complete sense. We all know that, but at least there's a process that everyone understands and everyone follows.
Okay. So Trent, and I could definitely get that. For me, I notice also the gun stuff. So like if you have a 6-shot revolver and they fire 12 rounds without them reloading, I notice that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and the culture is the big one most people get wrong. It's very tropishly, drill sergeant parade ground 1950s movie style, instead of what the people actually experience. The tricky part of that, though, is recognizing, I think, that every era of the military is slightly different. So I would hazard a guess that what I went through in the GWAT era, the Global War on Terror era, is not going to be the same as what people that came after us are going through right now. My experience was different than the ones that were Cold War sort of time frame soldiers. So I do think that's another thing we have to factor in.
Yeah. And
And you
the
can
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was to say the attitudes, right? Yeah, you always got to take into account. It's like when you're watching a movie or anything. What time phrase was this written in? What was the attitudes at the time? Um, my experiences as a young officer are probably vastly different pre GWAT than any officer who joined after 9/11. But still, the military runs in cycles, right? It's what's old is new again. So I think that's kind of, I guess, I become kind of jaded in that respect. That if somebody introduces something new, chances are it's probably been done before, or at least tried before, and it probably didn't work the last time. Um, Probably need to understand why it didn't work so we don't make the same mistakes again this time. Maybe we have changed enough of the culture or whatever else is going on that this process will now work again. But understanding what that process is and why it did or did not work, that's now where I guess I'm at in understanding the DoD. I do a lot of work now in my current job working with the Department of Defense and the air staff and space staff on acquiring new weapon systems. And it's it's that cycle. It's hey, we should do things this way. Well, we tried to do that 20 years ago, and it didn't work then because we didn't either have these policies in place, or we didn't have the budget, or we just didn't have the technologically minded people to make it happen. Um, Two of those three things have changed now. Okay, maybe we can give it another try. Or hey, nothing's changed. So now, how do I write the position paper to tell my boss, sir, this ain't going to work, and this is why, and we probably shouldn't get behind this because it's going to fail miserably.
So before we move on to talking about things from a fan angle, I have to say, since you've got the connection to weapon system, I'm just saying next time you're talking to the man in power, rods from God, we need them. Just because it's cool to say. I
I
mean,
can
I
neither
don't know if it's functional or not, but it just sounds cool.
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Yeah, I'm just saying we've never seen the dark side of the moon. Just saying. All right. So transitioning from the writing side to the fan angle, let's talk about author milestones. You're a relatively new author. Most of your titles under your belt at this point are short stories and anthologies, which is a pretty normal way to go, kind of establish yourself. So what milestones with regard to interacting with fans and such are you most excited to experience and you know engage in?
So yeah, now that I have my first novel under my belt, I'm going to three conventions next year: Superstars writing seminar here in Colorado Springs, Fantasy in Raleigh, and then LibertyCon. So I won't be attending as a professional for those. I don't think I haven't heard back from them yet on that, but at least I'll be able to go and for Fallen Empires, that's Canon Publishing. I'll be sitting at their table and I'll have books available to sign. So that'll be a brand new experience for me. I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping people will show up and at least buy one book. That would be nice. But I'm looking forward to just talking to people about my writing.
Okay, that's a good one to look forward to. Um, so this is the part of the interview where it's gonna be a really long list, but you get to tell us everything you've written. So what kind of stories? What kind of stories were your short stories? Like, can you give us sort of the scope of the type of stories you like to tell?
Sure, sure. I've written quite a bit for Canon Publishing. J.F. Holmes was the guy who first discovered me and encouraged me to start writing professionally. So I've written for him. I've written in one of his anthologies, the Spring 2019 Sci-Fi Anthology. That was a military sci-fi. There's a couple of officers who are going into Iraq to look for WMD, and they end up finding a lot more than they expected. Um, I've was one of the founding members of Joint Task Force 13, which is now run by Three Ravens Publishing. So I've written a couple of stories for that. So that's military supernatural with the application of heavy weapons and high explosives. Um, and then I have written for you. That was, I guess, on Deadly Ground would be military science fiction as well. And then one last story for Three Ravens, Misfits of Magic anthology, which is a fantasy anthology. So that was my first foray into writing fantasy science fiction or fantasy stories.
So did you do the your call is very important to us, the Tales from the Global War on Terror anthology the Three Ravens put out or will
N-
be putting out?
No, I wanted to do that, but at the time that it was due, I was trying to finish up Silent Violence. So I told Hillbilly I just couldn't make it.
Yeah, I got a couple of some content in that one. That should be interesting. And the
Yeah.
title is, of course, your call is very important to us because that's what they say on every time you get put on hold
Yep.
at any. Well, the VA specifically for this anthology,
Yeah.
but any bureaucratic entity is going to have that, and then elevator music in the background.
Yeah.
So, are you doing their mill sci-fi one that they've got Blood, Sweat, and Steel? I think. Did you submit to that one as well?
No, because I actually have a couple of new projects under my belt that I'm working on. If you want me to talk about those now, I can.
Sure, we're here. Why not?
Yeah. I was invited by Chris Kennedy Publishing to write in the Four Horsemen universe, their new Phoenix initiative. So I am on my way to writing that book. I've got over 10,000 words on that written. And then I was also invited by Three Ravens by Hillbilly to participate in the new Car Wars fiction line that they are writing. So I'm going to be trying to write both of those nearly simultaneously.
Brave, brave man. I write one at a time because I'm
Yeah.
simple like that. So, well, hopefully you don't pull your hair out. That would be bad. But while all of those sound fascinating, since we're here to talk about your novel, it's pretty easy to guess. It's Silent Violence. It's Fallen Empire Volume 4. So, first off, can you read Fallen Empire Volume 4 without having read anything else? Because it's sort of weirdly situated in that it's deep in the canon, but it's also other Fallen Empire stories seem to be short story collections.
Yeah, so you can totally read each one of those books independently. Although the first two, the Irish Brigade and Overrun, they Overrun follows Irish Brigade. The idea that we came up with for that was kind of a universe similar to like what Hammer Slammers was, or Falkenberg's Legion. The gritty violence that mercenaries have to face in a science fiction setting. And so we wanted to have a universe where multiple authors could write, and they could write independently of each other, or at least not have it set up where you had to read one after the other. We kind of looked at what was happening in the Four Horsemen, and where there's 70 some odd books. Where do you start, and do you actually have to read all of them? So it was a deliberate effort to say, nope, you can read one of these, you could read all of these. It really doesn't matter. There are some call outs, like for example, in Irish Brigade, I actually wrote a section in there for JF when they're doing the space station assault. He brought in my unit to do that. And then I reference his unit in my novel because his unit commander was the one who actually gave mine the idea to become a mercenary. So there's some ties between the books, but it's not necessary to have read them all.
So I grew up a military brat. I served for myself for 8.5 years, ma pa, apple pie, and rah rah flag stuff. So, having said that, I sometimes have trouble getting behind the concept of the mercenary, someone who's fighting not for a cause but just for money. Did you find that was difficult for you, having been a career airman yourself, to do?
Ye- so I had to really sit down and think about that. I mean, yeah, I've read a ton of military science fiction that featured mercenaries, the Dorsai by Gordon Dixon, and like I said, Falkenberg's Legion, Hammer Slammers, right? And those were characters that you just you met in the middle of the situation, so you didn't at the time think about that. But when I was sitting down and writing Silent Violence, which started actually while the unit was still in active service before they became mercenaries, I had to think, why? Why did these guys become mercenaries? And one of the themes in the Fallen Empire universe is all of these races, the humans and the others, they've just completed an armistice that ended a very very long war, and now we're in this situation where the governments are demobilizing on a massive scale. So there's hundreds of thousands of people, military veterans, who are now going to be very soon out of work. And as we know, a lot of times when it happens on that scale, the government doesn't handle it very well. So what I explored in my book is my unit commander, Fremont McManus. He was actually selected for promotion, and he was going to be continuing on in the new, vastly reduced Terran Marine Corps. But he looked at his unit, who's going to be demobilized en masse, And these are guys and gals that he's fought alongside, and they've shed blood and sweat across multiple worlds. And he just found that he couldn't do it. He couldn't just take that promotion and leave them in the lurch when he knew that they were just going to be kicked to the curb. And so that's where he gets the inspiration from his former commander, the commander of the Irish Brigade, say, "Hey, I did a private military corporation. Why don't you do one too? I know you can do it." And so he takes that idea and says, "Yeah, you know what? I'll put that to the guys and see what they want to do and see if they actually want to turn mercenary, because the alternative is, you're out on the street and you maybe got a separation allowance and that's it, right? A lot of these, the young guys, the 18, 19, 20-year olds, they don't have the education. They have a certain skill set, which doesn't necessarily translate into the civilian world. That was something that I had to learn when I retired from the Air Force. So I really, really had to sit down and think my way through just, I'm not just going to hand wave it and say, oh yeah, they all decided to become mercenaries. No, there had to be a valid reason why you would give up a life as a civilian, and choose to take up the life of a mercenary and fight for no particular government. We all fight for pay, right? I mean, it's not the pay that makes you a mercenary. It's the fact that you don't support any one particular political cause. But so yeah, it was probably the most eye-opening part of writing that book, is coming up for reasons why we fight and why we should fight, not for a government but for a corporation.
So have gun will travel doesn't get you very far in the civilian world. Like that skill set is very limited and niche in its versatility. Anybody that was a grunt can tell you that as well. I know many of us at the VA are like, man, I should have picked up a trade. I should have been an auto mechanic or something. But when you're 17, blowing crap up sounds fun. So that is definitely something to think about. Just, what options are in the society they'd be returning to, especially after a long war. Are there jobs waiting for them? Is the economy going to support that? So that's definitely something to think about. Do they take the approach, and we're going to pause in a minute for the commercial, but do they take the approach where like they're picking their contracts specifically to a larger ideological goal, or is it just purely mercenary?
So I actually have to get into that as well, because I wanted it to be believable. So the first contract that they take was the first one that was available. It wasn't, or available to, I should say, for their particular skill set. So these guys, they're Marines. They are the title is MIST, MIST, which stands for Microgravity Strike Team. So think Force Recon, but their specialty is space station assaults, boarding actions, things like that. They are the experts in working in microgravity, working in a vacuum. So to make best use of that skill set, a lot of what they do is going to take place in outer space. So the first contract that comes along to deal with that, they really don't have a choice. There's not much other prospects out there. And that becomes kind of a running theme throughout the book is, hey, we have a very specialized skill set. There's not a whole lot of people who want to hire us and pay the amount of money that we need in order to maintain all of our suits. So we can't necessarily afford to be politically picky. We're not going to, we don't want to pick a contract, and they actually go through this. We don't want a contract with a government who we know is going to screw us over. But to a certain extent, when it comes down to how do I make payroll, you may have to sacrifice some of that in order to be able to take care of your people.
Absolutely. Before we get in too deeply, though, we are going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man. And since Christmas just passed, you might still be in a little bit of the spirit, so I'm sponsoring this episode myself. So let's give Garrett and Michael Brown a listen.
Ho, ho! Oh, hell. Is that sleigh bells ringing in your ears or a few rounds from an M60? You wanted the jolly fat man to bring Yuletide joy, but the season has gifted you with a heartbreaker and a life taker. Badass Santa. Grab your eggnog and camouflage candy canes. Strap on your bulletproof holiday stockings and prepare for thrills and kills. From blood-stained rebellion at the North Pole to a Black Ops raid on a distant planet, these 18 action-packed tales will show you Saint Nick as you have never seen him before. It's all you'll want for Christmas.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So now we're going to dive into the story itself. Before we do that, we're going to take a moment to look at this cover, and you can tell us the story. Like, how'd you come up with this as your cover? What was the process? What was your involvement?
Yeah, so JF has an artist that he has on contract that he will send the ideas that we come up with, and so you know being that most of the rest of the units in the Fallen Empires are ground-based units, um, those covers, I guess he had a lot to choose from to do those. But for this one, we really had to think about what did we want to portray, and we had seen some other art that some other artists had done that we weren't able to get the rights to, but it showed things like boarding action on a battleship, or it showed I think there was one where there was these spacesuited figures that were dropping on like a moon base or something like that. And so we wanted something that showed action in space, and this is what his artist came up with. And the moment that both of us saw this, we said, "Oh yeah, this is it. This is exactly what we're talking about. Is these guys are doing? They're standing on the hull of a ship or a station, and they're breaching, and they're going to go through, and they're going to commit violence against the guys inside."
Okay. I do like the acronym that you came up with, because I'm a big fan of like the ODST, the Halo lore, orbital drop shock troops, and the idea of like the orbital insertion that way, which is sort of what you're going for. But obviously you can't just steal ODST as an acronym, but it's kind of on point. So whenever I see someone get creative with a solution, like I totally dig it. And then of course, you can't really give yours away, because the minute you do, someone's going to beat you to the punch, right?
Yep, yep.
Because there's only so many you could come up with that sound cool, right? So I really do like Mist. I was going to make a joke that you could name one Mistborn about one of their kids, but then I realized Brandon Sanderson would get a little angry.
Yeah.
So don't do that. We don't want Mr. Holmes getting sued. Um, I do dig the cover though. So let's talk about the book itself now. So what would your 30-second elevator pitch be?
30-second elevator pitch. Okay, so what do you do when everything you know about your military career is turned on its ear? Everything that you have fought for and bled for is changing, and the people that you've worked with are now being kicked to the curb. What is your option? It's one of the options is to become a private military corporation or a mercenary. And now you're going to have that opportunity to fight for the people that are alongside you rather than a government who is impersonal and ignoring everything that you accomplish.
Okay. So what do you think makes both the story and the series special? So answer kind of both, but in whatever order makes the most sense to you.
So I like the series. I like the universe that we came up with. It started out with the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, but in space and 500 years in the future. So you have the Gracian Empire; it's collapsing under its own internal politics. You have the humans and the other subject races now fighting for their freedom, which ended in that armistice that I talked about, and a creation of a demilitarized zone, where all these nations said, okay, we're not going to try and overtly spread influence here, and so that led to the perfect writing ground for these mercenary units. It was really an open universe with only we wrote a Bible ahead of time as to how things would work and what level of technology we would have, but anything can go in this universe, and you will see as other books come out, that we're going to explore different types of units and how they do things, how do mercenary units function in this type of environment. And for me, as the other authors who are writing in this were talking about what they wanted to write, I recognized that they're all talking about ground combat. We made a rule that we're not going to do ship to ship combat. That's too impersonal. And I said, there's nobody writing about real space marines. These guys who are out there in their suits in the cold vacuum of space. And of course, at the time we were coming up with this, the Expanse TV series was huge. So I drew a lot of personal inspiration from that, and how to uh, make violence in space more personable, right? Too many times, all you see is this helmeted figure that is in the distance, and you don't see who's behind the visor. So I wanted to get beyond that and make this what we talked about, which is a nitty gritty level of violence that is the individual trooper trying to fight his way to complete his contract.
Okay. So, which tropes do you feel like Silent Violence, which I think is a nicely alliterated title, hits the best?
So that's funny. The title actually comes from the unit's motto, which is Violentium in Silentium, which is violence in silence. So that's where we flip that around and turn that into the title of the book. Um, the tropes that this takes after, well, you mentioned ODST and kind of the Halo perspective. I drew also from Starship Troopers, but it's about um, fighting for each other, fighting for the guy, your buddy alongside you, um, fighting against the evil corporations. Right, I've got one evil and one not so evil corporation in this book. They're duking it out, and the Mist become kind of like a pawn in their game until they find out that this pawn has laser weapons. Um, so I didn't want to go down the mecha route. So I deliberately tried to again stay away or stay in the personal trooper type of lane, where it was not so much about the suit, but more about the man inside the suit.
The hard part of doing that is, and people like to write these elite Space Marine units, and in real time, you look at the Rangers or the Green Berets, or Pararescue or any of the other special forces. They're well-oiled machines, and you don't have a lot of room to talk. Like, you don't have a lot of need to talk. And you add to that now the impersonality, or the impersonal body armor, which covers even facial expressions. And how do you write these characters as believable and as characters with personalities if in real life they're probably going to be a well-oiled machine, and the personality comes up out of the mission when they're chilling in the ready room? But most people don't want to read about them chilling in the ready room. So how you balance adding character, and that's something you hit on really well just a second ago, is because that is something to consider. And most people don't think about it because their exposure to the military sci-fi is just the tropes in the TV. And so, they're in real life, like, good luck calling somebody Sarge. They're not going to like that. Generally, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where you got to balance the reality with the needs of the story. And the reality is sometimes it can be impersonal, like, the shooting somebody at a distance where they might not ever see you, right? And you
Yeah.
factor that in, because that what used to be the sniper motto that was jokingly in the running cadences: you can run, you'll just die tired. You run into some of that with some slight differences when you're writing actual void combat, because it's so impersonal. So all you have is almost the voice. So I think you nailed the critical part of that when you were just describing that. So that's pretty cool. So obviously this is military sci-fi because you said that, but what other genres or subgenres do you think this fits into?
Oh wow. Hmm, that's a tough one. Um, it's probably a little bit into the science fiction realm, because pure science fiction, or hard sci-fi, because we look at from the Grossian perspective, the aliens who were originally in charge, they were bioengineers. And so one of the things that we all tried to do in each of our books was to have like these bioengineered animals that took take the place of like robots and other things. um, I tried to figure out how to do that for the Marines. I had originally had this squid, this little squid about yay big that was inside a grenade, and the squid had a camera attached to them. And the Marines, when they wanted to like go across a corner or cross a covered ground, they would unleash the squid and throw them against a wall and around the corner so that they could then have like a remote view of what's down the corridor without actually having somebody to stick their head around there. But I just couldn't make it believable, right? That you have these squids that function in the vacuum of space. So I unfortunately I had to drop that. I added in a few other things. Um, but let's see here. Other trope or other genres. Um, is there? I guess drama would be. I don't know. Is drama a genre?
I don't know. I know it sounds well. I mean, it's because you have female Marines too, but it almost sounds like it could be men's adventure fiction, which is
Yeah.
one that mill sci-fi often falls into. But still sounds interesting. So, is
Yeah.
there going to be an audiobook for this?
I am hoping there's going to be. Right now, we're still waiting to hear back on how sales are doing. I guess that'll determine whether or not there's an audiobook. I would really love to have that happen. I've had both of the JTF 13 anthologies that I've been in. The Three Ravens has turned those into audiobooks, so that's pretty awesome. Hearing a narrator like Talon Beeson reading your story and adding in the emotion that you were originally thinking when you wrote the words and having that come through in his voice.
Absolutely. It changes the way you write when you have to think about some of the word echoes that aren't as big a deal when people are reading as they are when someone's reading it out loud.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah. My
now
wife,
let's
I
go
was gonna
ahead.
say my wife gives me a lot of strange looks sometimes when I'm writing because when I write a particularly tricky piece of dialogue, I will read it back to myself. I try to do it under my breath, but sometimes I get a little bit loud and she looks at me funny, like, "What are you doing?" But they're just trying to get my dialogue to sound natural.
I mean, it could be worse. You could be writing other types of fiction where you read it out loud and people are going to look at you funny.
Yeah.
Could you imagine the romance author sitting there
Oh,
with their
geez.
spouse and like, honest, honey, I'm not cheating. It's work. Um, so let's talk about the story itself. What can you tell us about your main character? Is there just one, or is it a ensemble cast?
It's okay. So there is the main character, Captain Fremont McManus. He is the lead. I have a few other viewpoint characters. There is Private in the unit. That was some good advice that I got from Shane Grease, who is a Army colonel, infantry colonel. He gave me some feedback and said, "Hey, you need a viewpoint character down at the grunt level." So I included Private Jordan down there, and he actually I really liked writing him, and if I get to write another book, you're going to see more of him as he rises in the ranks. And then I have a third viewpoint character who is she is a corporate spy, I guess is the best way to put it, for the not so evil corporation in the book. And she actually was a lot of fun to write too, because I could step outside the military mindset and say, okay, well, I know how the military would handle the situation, but if you're a corporate person and you're trying to maybe maintain the image of your corporation, how would you handle that differently? So that was a lot of fun writing from her perspective. And she figures very prominently into the plot. The more I wrote her, the more I said, okay, yeah, you need to have a bigger role in what's going on here. And then the one that I had the most fun writing, he's not a viewpoint character. In other words, we don't see things from his perspective, but he's the intelligence officer for the Mist, and he's a retired naval captain of intelligence, and he's the sounding board for Fremont, and the two of them get to have a lot of just one-on-one conversations, commander and his intelligence officer, but also an older guy who's seen a lot and understands how hard it is to be in command, and so that allowed me to put a much more personable face on this stoic commander who is trying to make sure that everything is done for best for his troops, but he's not allowed to really show a whole lot of emotion or other unusual things in front of his troops. So like I said, it gave me the opportunity to show another side to him.
Okay, so what about the secondary characters? Were there any secondary characters that you were especially memorable to you?
Yeah. Well, so I hope this guy is memorable. Um, I have a Lance Corporal in the book who is the ultimate in the E4 mafia that doesn't exist. Um, he's the comedic relief. He's a good trooper. He just needs someone to keep him on task. There's a scene where he and Jordan are on the hull of a merchant. They're setting a trap for a pirate, and they actually disable the pirate ship using the equivalent of like an AT4. And the Lance Corporal is the one who fired the AT4, and so he's all happy that they've done this because now he gets to paint a pirate kill sticker on his armor. So he was a lot of fun to write. And then there was let's see here, some members of the corporate. Oh, my bad guy, one of my lead bad guys. He's former special operations, and he was very he wasn't evil, right? He's just got a job to do. His boss gave him a job, and part of that job is to take out the mist. And so he's going to go about dismantling this military unit using some of the lessons that he's learned as a special operations officer. But he has to deal with some criminal organizations, kind of like his muscle to do that. And so his distaste at having to work with these crooks when he's a former professional military guy, that made some really fun interactions, especially since he's planning on double crossing these criminals all the time, or from the beginning. So yeah, he was a lot of fun to write as well, because I got to show just what could happen behind the scenes, and why it's important for a military unit to have good operational security, so you're not giving away what's going on inside.
OPSEC is a tricky one to make interesting, though. So
It
good on
was,
you
yeah.
for trying, because that's one of those ones that people that know would know, but for the average rank and file, it's like, this is boring. Can they blow shit up? I mean, stuff. I'm sorry, we were trying not to cuss, but yeah. So there's a reason you don't see as much of that in fiction, because it's hard to do. So let's talk about the um, story itself. So what can you tell us about Captain Fremont? It is Fremont, right?
Fremont McManus, yeah. People who know him well call him Free. Um, as I said, the story starts out, the unit's on active duty. It's one of the last battles before the armistice is signed. His unit pulls off an amazing feat. They capture an enemy battleship in that action. Wasn't their idea. Some admiral who wanted to grab some glory sent them on that mission. They took pretty horrendous casualties doing it, but they were successful, which is one of the reasons why he is tagged for promotion. Um, but as I said, they end up becoming a mercenary unit. The first contract they take is about putting down an insurgency in this system. The miners who are out there, they've gotten tired of the control from the corporation or the government on the main planet, and so they've said, you know what, we're the ones who know how to operate out here, so we're just going to basically stop all shipments until you give us what we want. So they bring in the mist. The mist goes and figures out what's going on with these insurgents, do a little bit of intelligence gathering, and figure out where the leadership are. They stage a raid on that base. So that's like their first action as a military or as a mercenary unit. Um, it gave me a chance to do an actual assault on the space station from a ship that's a couple hundred miles away from the station, and how that would actually play out. From there, we learn about what's happening. We get introduced to the corporations, and basically, what's going to happen is now that this armistice has been signed, and you've got this demilitarized zone where the governments are not operating, the corporations are saying, "Hey, we can make a lot of money out here." Right? These markets are open. There's no regulation. There's no government agents looking over our shoulders. So the system that the mercs are in becomes a host for a conference where all these corporations are going to come and present their ideas. And of course, there's going to be all sorts of maneuvering behind the scenes. And so that's where we learn, what each of the two big corporations, the evil and not so evil, are trying to do in order to secure these contracts. And when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, right, things are going to start getting pretty ugly pretty quick. And the Mist, in the meantime, is trying to figure out, where do we get another job? We completed the first one, but we didn't like how the government operated, and especially the way they treated the insurgents. But we kind of don't have a choice because we're stuck in the system. We don't have our own ship. We can't get to any other system to get a job. And so, like I said, sometimes you have to say, all right, I'll go back to work for this guy, even though I know he's probably going to screw me over. Except I can ask for more money this time. And
So, oh, go ahead.
no, good. What's your question?
So when they capture the ship, do they get to seize it by the laws of the sea, essentially? Well, I guess the laws of space, the void, whatever. Or did they have to turn that over?
They had to turn that over, right? That was another thing that I made an essential part of the story, right? So here you are, you're a professional military officer. You're used to, rules and regulations governing how you do things, and of course, above all, the government being in charge. And now you're a mercenary, you're on your own. You have to sign a contract with somebody in order to get paid. There's a lot of legalese in there that can trip you up. And so part of the first half of the book is about the Mist learning, what? Just because you signed a contract saying you're going to get paid for capturing these guys, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to turn out well for you. There's a scene in there. I don't want to give it away, but it's basically what soured them, and how I said, how they treated the insurgents, that soured the Mist, because it kind of painted the Mist in a bad light, made them look like just these hired killers, which is not good for your professional reputation if you're trying to get good contracts that pay the kind of money that you want.
Yeah, it's a tricky problem, and once you dive off that road, sometimes it's hard to come back from it. So you give your characters an interesting set of problems that they have to then find solutions for. Um, so what can you tell us? I mean, you've hinted at the bad guy is a little bit of the corporations. Are there any one bad guy, or is it just the faceless corporation?
Yeah, so I kind of set it up a little bit like Star Wars, as a matter of fact, where you have the emperor type character who's like the vice president back on Earth, and he's the one who's like kind of setting up all of the pieces on the board. The former special operations guy, the bad guy on the scene, right? He's the one who's the primary antagonist that's up against Captain McManus, and so he's the one that's he's hiring the criminal organization. He's setting up the pirate raids, and basically the whole objective of this corporation, this evil corporation, is we want to make the security situation in this system look so bad that none of the other corporations want to bid on these contracts, and so they'll leave, and that leaves the whole playing field to this evil corporation, and then they get all the contracts themselves, and then they swoop in with their own security forces and, quote, take care of the pirates that they had hired in the first place, and lots of money to be made. But unfortunately, the Mist, being very good at what they do, are handling the pirates on their own. So now evil corporation vice president says, okay, these guys are too much trouble. They're upsetting our plans. I need you to take them out. The climax of the book is the criminal organization that was hired by these guys. They stage an assault on the dependents of the Mist, right? So they go after their families, and no surer way to piss off a military unit than to go after your families, and that's the climactic assault there at the very end of the book.
That probably ends badly.
For for
So
for the for somebody, yes.
So speaking of characters, you've just told us the hell you put them through. You kind of tortured them, abandoned them in the, you know, backwards nowhere galaxy. So if you ran into them in a dark alley and they knew who you were, how do you see that interaction playing out? You gonna end up in the hospital, the brig, or dead?
um, well, if it's Captain McManus, probably in the hospital, not dead, because that would look bad. if it was one of his troopers, especially one that had a family there that was put in danger, yeah, I probably wouldn't live to survive the experience. And if it
Okay.
was his intelligence officer, probably nothing would happen in the dark alley. But about 3 weeks later, I'd probably find that my credit rating was in the trash, and there was all sorts of nasty stories spreading about me on social media.
Hmm. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the characters in this universe. So when you write those characters, do you have a favorite character archetype?
So, like I said, for Captain McManus, that was my go-to character for a situation like that, right? I mean, we've all known good commanders, and so I wanted him to be a good commander, and so I thought about all of the good commander traits that I know of, and I wanted him to espouse, which was putting his people before the mission. Making sure that they have what they need to accomplish the mission, listening to them, all those things that he should do in terms of taking care of his unit. Um, and then for the bad guy, I didn't want him to be like I said, I didn't want him to be evil. I didn't want him to do evil just for evil's sake. Like I said, he's a hired gun. This former special operations guy, and so he's just doing a job, and parts of it may not be so nice, but it's the job and it's what he gets paid for. He's done a hell of a lot worse when he was working for the government. So in his mind, yeah, he's probably advanced a level on the morality scale. So I tried to avoid the obvious tropes. You can't avoid tropes altogether when you're writing, but I wanted to these characters' actions and why they did things to be believable to the reader.
Okay. So let's take a look behind the curtain and see how the sausage was made. So sometimes when we write stories, we cut scenes out that might be interesting to the readers, but maybe go places the story didn't need. So were there any cool scenes that got cut when you were writing Silent Violence?
Yeah. So originally, I had as part of one of the subplots a Grossian ship left over from the war that was hiding in deep space, and these guys were hardcore imperialists. The empire had fallen and it's all the fault of these subject races, so we're going to take our revenge on them. And so they were doing things like they were paying off pirates to operate, and they were staging their own raids, and just basically in general making a menace of themselves. Unfortunately, I didn't get too far in writing all of that out because I realized that that would complicate the corporate plot that was going on and perhaps distract away from that plot, and two, it would probably push the book well over 100,000 words, and that's not something I wanted to do for my first book. Um, so I just put all that in a separate file, and if I get to write another Silent Violence book or a follow on to this one, these guys will definitely figure prominently because I really want to explore that. Right, there's got to be some diehards that are left behind who are pissed off at what happened to their empire, and they want to make people pay for that. So I figure that's a good villain that we can all get behind.
Okay. All right. So hold on. Oh, computer almost froze for a second. So Silent Violence, The Fallen Empire, Volume 4, the name tells you that it's part of a series. Um, is their story done? What's next for these characters and the universe, since the universe is a character?
Yeah, so I know that JF is looking at future stories in this universe. We've had myself and Shane Grease, who wrote Battle Drills, Volume 3. Casey Moores is, I believe, thinking about a book in this. I don't know if he's committed to that or not. And then there's some other authors, Armando Barboa, who he had one of the short stories in Overrun. He's also talked about writing about some of the early days of the fall of the empire. So yeah, we've got a lot of people who are looking forward to this. Depending on how sales go, JF may ask me to write another, a follow-on to Silent Violence. I would love to have that happen. So please go out there, buy this book, and if you want to read more about what happens to the Mist.
Okay. So The story then, it sounds like, is self-contained in the novel. The universe continues, but this story at least is complete.
Yes, yeah. There's I wrap up the major storyline about the evil corporation, but I leave things open for how these characters could develop in the future and where they could go now that they've proven themselves as a capable mercenary unit. Um, I won't say the universe is their oyster, but they're certainly getting a lot more job offers.
Definitely helps. So we know that every literary universe, at least the good ones, have their own internally consistent rules of science, technology, and magic. So what sort of tech can we expect from the Fallen Empire's universe?
So we didn't want to go high tech. Stuff had to be mostly believable. We made some allowances for the advances in the amount of years, but considering that we established that the Grassians are bioengineers, um, there's no robots, there's no androids, things like that. Weapons. Because of the far-flung nature of the empire, had to be locally sustainable. So again, we're not talking plasma or high-tech plasma weapons. There are some plasma weapons in the story, but they're heavy weapons, used sporadically. There are lasers, but they're not the fantastical lasers that can shoot through anything. You have to worry about your power packs. You have to worry about your charging. Spaceships, we put that in the background because again, this is supposed to be about the in-person importance. We just established that there is some sort of hyperspace or faster than light space travel that's available, but that all happens in the background.
Okay, so of all the tech that you invented, both for the humans and the aliens, what would you want for your daily use?
Yeah. So myself and Lucas Markham, who's another author that has expressed interest in writing in this, we came up with the idea of a vibro dagger. So it's basically a battery or a powered blade that vibrates at a high speed with a monomolecular edge that can cut through a lot of stuff. And he liked it because the unit that he's writing about is kind of based on the Roman legions, and so he wanted it like equivalent of a gladius. And I said, I like that because number one, I want a shorter one, kind of like a naval dirk style. From if you look at the old like 1800s, but also, when you're fighting in the vacuum of space, I don't have to kill you to take you out of action. All I have to do is put a hole in your suit. And if I'm engaged in close combat with you and I've got a vibro dirk and you just have the butt of your weapon, I'm probably going to tear open your suit before you do any damage to me. So I really like that concept, and that does you do see that in my book.
Okay, that's I think a lot of people like the idea of the vibro dagger. I've seen that in a lot of um, universes. I think I wonder how many of them are inspired by the explosive daggers that you see divers having that shoot the compressed air for the
I don't
amount of
know.
damage.
We took our inspiration from Warhammer 40,000 and the
Yeah,
chainsword that they have there.
yeah, it's a fun concept. I get it. I dig it too. So, what would you? How would you abuse that tech if you had it in your daily life?
Oh man.
Obviously, you still work for the government, so this is
Oh boy.
for fiction.
What's that expression about Star Wars? There's 100% chance if I had powers of a Jedi, I would use them entirely inappropriately. Um, um, let's see here. Well, maybe somebody who pissed you off in a staff meeting might find that their tires are mysteriously flat. uh, Gosh,
That could be a
that's
fun.
yeah, that's a tough. That's not something I necessarily want to admit to in the open press here.
You would just play with it in a junkyard where no one cares if you break things.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah.
I like that. So you mentioned earlier that you did have aliens. So when you create those aliens, and you can use silent violence or anything else you've written or plan on writing, how do you go about creating these creatures? Do you let your nightmares inspire you, Mother Nature, myth and lore? Like when you create these non-human beings, like how do you go about doing that?
So that was another rule that we put in when we were writing the Bible is we don't want the Star Trek original series aliens with prosthetics, right? If they're going to be non-human, they need to have something non-human about them, and which is hard because humans, we cross so many different genres of our own, or so many different archetypes. Um, so mostly what we went for is aliens who were either specialized in one particular area. Like we've got one race, they are merchants, right? And everything for them revolves around the deal. That's their life, their culture, that shapes how they interact with everybody. We've got another race that they grew up in a very dim planet, right? They had a really thick atmosphere, so not a whole lot of light gets through to the surface. So for them, uh, everything that they do is centered around light as a religious ritual. So seeing bright light isn't just, I mean, yeah, it hurts their eyes, but to them that's a religious experience. So it was about focusing on specific elements of the alien race and kind of emphasizing that more than you normally would for like a human.
The other trend that you have to watch for, and this is you as more collective, is people say, well, the aliens have this about them, and every alien is going to be like, I don't know, afraid of the dark. And you just keep thinking, like, humans have certain traits. How many? You can't really say there's anything universal about humans unless you're talking pure biology, right?
Yeah.
And so that is definitely, that you set guidelines. I think that, just makes the overall product that much better. So, um, since this interview is winding down, before we let you go, was there anything about Silent Violence, Fallen Empire, Volume 4 that we didn't ask you that you wanted to tell us?
Um, Well, you didn't ask me how much money they make, which is good because I don't really get into that. We established the fact that there are credits, not dollars or any other currency, but we didn't want to bog down in the currency thing. So just suffice to say that as a mercenary, you're usually paid pretty well. Um, but sometimes you have lean times. So yeah, that's probably something that I didn't explore too much of, but who knows? It may come into play in the future, especially as they take on more jobs and maybe have to juggle improving their gear or buying a ship or something.
Okay. So before we go, I did forget to ask you earlier, but what would you say the age range is for this story? So, like for the readers, because we do have some families that listen to the show together.
Yeah. Um, Well, okay, so there is swearing and cussing in the book. These are military guys, and there are some very violent scenes and scenes of violent death. So, if you think that your readers in your family are okay handling that, then by all means, it's not over the top. I'm not approaching it from that direction, but for the anyone who's reading it from with a military background, I wanted it to be familiar, the casual swearing that happens in day-to-day military life.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard because on the one hand you want to be realistic, and on the other you got to tone it down for the sensibilities of people that don't get, like in the infantry. F is just it's like a comma. You just use it a lot in a sentence.
Yeah.
Um, of course, that my editor would tell you I use too many commas, so that's another story. Uh,
Yeah, there's a
so
great video out there. This a Marine gunnery sergeant is giving a pre-mission brief to his guys before he goes out, and in the space of like 2 minutes, I think he uses the F word like 35 times.
that's it.
Well, it's only 2 minutes.
I
he
mean,
he had to
those are
pass
rookie
some
numbers.
information along about the mission.
Those are rookie numbers, buddy. He's got to get that up. So before we let you go, dear listener, this is the part where we hearken back to days of old, and we remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books, so do your part. And it really does make a difference. In fact, you would have recently heard us talk about on a fireside chat the value of book reviews. So if you haven't, listen to that one too, and contribute to the book economy, and share the love that we all nerd out about anyway. So as we bring this to a close, Michael, can you tell us and the listeners how they can find you?
Sure. I am primarily on Facebook. I have my author page there. You find that in the show notes, I believe. I also have an Amazon author page that you can find links to all of the anthologies and to Silent Violence. I am in the process of setting up my own personal author page. Just finding a web hosting service to do that is kind of tricky for people who aren't used to doing that. But yeah, please look for me. And if you like my books, leave a review. Tell me what you liked so I can write more of that.
Okay, and you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot_fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. We have a website at anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. We do have a proper website coming. Got a little bit of derailed. Doc's son got into football, and that sort of consumed her life for a while. But we are looking to get someone to put that website together. And again, when you're not technologically inclined, that can be a daunting thing. So I feel your pain, Michael. But you can also support us on anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes, because I think coffee goes through your liver too, but I'm not a biologist, people. But on that note, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And on that note, Michael, thank you for stopping by. This was fun.
Oh, yeah, I had a blast. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. We will see you later this week, people.